rendition of the national anthem at the CDO conference. Now, you'll deny that that conference is just a vehicle to reinstate Boris Johnson, but isn't it the case that it's fair to say for you and your voters, if he did make a return before the next election, you think he might improve your chances?
Completely, Paul. It certainly would. I mean, if we can just go back to the local elections on the doorsteps, in these red wall seats up north like mine and where I was campaigning, there was certainly no appetite for Labour, but people was actually saying to me on the doorstep that they no longer fear a socialist government because this is what we have now. And I think this perception has put us in dangerous territory, not only as a party, but as a country, for those of us who can remember, how bad a Labour government was. So really, for me, this conference was making sure that these northern red wall seats have a voice, and that we're talking as Conservatives about the policies that are Conservative policies that go down well with our electorate.
And Patrick, what do you make of of both that conference and also the National Conservatism conference in London this week? Are they about trying to renew yourselves in office and have a healthy debate, as Michael Gove would suggest, or the evidence of a sort of deeper sign of dissent, as Andrea was suggesting, amongst the voters?
There's always got to be a wide spread of opinion across political parties, and I don't object to that whatsoever. What I think would be better if senior cabinet ministers restricted themselves as far as political conferences is to the main Conservative Party conference and not other sort of conferences that are trying to distract attention from the party overall. And one of the things I'd say to Andrea is, it's no good going back. Governments don't go back. Governments have to go forward. And I think what people want to see is Rishi getting the support that he needs as Prime Minister.
Could I come in on that point then, please?
Constituency, and he therefore very much gets it. And I think this government has faced two of the biggest issues that was in nobody's manifesto when we fought the 2019 general election. That of COVID and the Ukraine. And any government that faced those particular issues would find themselves, to an extent, blown off by events. That wonderful line that Macmillan used of what he feared most in government was events. And that's what the Prime Minister is having to deal with. Part of the biggest problem he's got is inflation. Inflation, that is mainly one of the principal reasons that's been caused to the degree it is because of what's happened with Ukraine and the impacts that the Ukrainian war has had on gas prices and also on food prices as well. Now, what the Prime Minister has to try and do with the rest of the Cabinet is plot the way forward, and that's what he's doing.
Right, can I come up on those points? Sorry,
room
Paul.
For cabinet ministers to dissent on big issues like immigration?
If I can answer your question, Paul, and if I can come back on some of the points that Patrick said. Regarding your question, I guess that Patrick's hinting at loyalty. And to me, yes, Patrick, you've been a fabulously loyal, and of every Prime Minister that you've served, you've got an impressive history in government. But if we look at our own Prime Minister, who was plucked out of obscurity as a junior minister, given the second biggest job in government as the Chancellor, yet when, as Patrick said, the government was going through a difficult time with the lockdowns and COVID, etc., for him to register the website 8 months before there was a vacancy, yes, exactly, doesn't show much loyalty to me. Now, back to the points that Patrick made as well. To me, it's not about dissent. I can really see, like we did during Theresa May's time when you was chairman, Patrick, disastrous elections, the never-ending Groundhog Day in Parliament, where, let's face it, Theresa May was cozying up to Corbyn to get the votes through. We are in dangerous territory here. And what I'm hearing from voters in these red wall seats, and we do need these red wall seats to form a government in the next election, is they want us to be low tax, low public spending. I agree what you said about inflation and all these issues that we're dealing with at the moment, Patrick. But they want low taxes. As Conservatives, we need to give the public a reason to come out and vote for us. They want us to be strong on law and order and sentencing, obviously controlling our borders, but also in lockdown, people was told what to do. And the public don't like that. Conservatives is about the individual. And when we see things like people being told you've got to heat your home in a certain way, you've got to drive a certain type of car, and people feeling their freedom of speech has been curtailed as well, it's very unconservative. So I think we need to go back to these true conservative values as an individual, that we respect the individual and them to make their choices. Then I think we'll be on the money. We can drive out this socialist threat.
And Patrick, you're in many ways the original Red Waller. You're a former miner, from Mansfield, the Derbyshire constituency, where a lot of the original Tory party's appeal started to attract some working class voters. What do you make of Andrea's point about the Red Wall and looking like it's being lost?
Well, look, there are things that Andrea said which I don't disagree with whatsoever. Of course, we want to get back to low inflation, low tax. I do buy that. I sometimes don't quite get that when I hear Conservative politicians from all sectors of the party call for more public expenditure in various issues. And unprecedented, as I say, unprecedented issues that have been put on the government as a result of COVID and the Ukraine that have cost us money that we never expected to have to pay. So those things have to be paid for. Andrea's talking about the lockdown. Of course, that was brought in by Boris on very, very sound reasons why it had to be done. So I think we've got to show that we've got a platform, that we know what we want to do. I think the 5 pledges, which the Prime Minister has already set out to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the votes, those are all very important cut-through issues, and we've got to support him in dealing with those.
And Andrea, on the issue of immigration in particular, we
Yes.
saw this week what certainly looked like tensions between the Home Secretary and the Treasury, and even Number 10 on just whether or not a higher level of net inward migration was acceptable. What's your stance on that, and what do you think your voters think of it?
I mean, my personal view, Paul, is that, where migration's concerned, if we've got a skills deficit and we need to bring people in, because it obviously takes time, there's a time lapse in training up our own British people to fill these roles, or if people going to come into the country to invest and set up businesses, I've got no problem. But when we see numbers going up, I especially after Brexit and the reason why people voted for Brexit, it is about taking control of our borders. It's also about taking control of our laws. And I was highly disappointed this week when we saw Kemi make her statement that we by the end of the year, even though the Prime Minister promised in his leadership campaign, we would tear up the 4,000 EU laws and we would put forward our own laws instead. So to me, it's actually about honouring our promises. And I don't disagree with what Patrick's saying, these 5 areas that the Prime Minister's trying to concentrate on. But the key is not just flash photo opportunities, it's actually delivering on this, because we will be in opposition if we don't deliver on all these things. And look, it'll be a coalition of chaos with Lib Dem, Labour, possibly SNP, and no doubt it'll be a hung parliament if it carries on this route. So delivery is going to be the most important thing to me, Paul, and the voters.
Patrick, Andrew just mentioned Kemi Badenoch and the retained EU law bill, and a decision to do what she calls pragmatic Brexitism, which is to sort of rescue the bits of that bill and make it more streamlined. Now, you yourself were in the unusual position of being a rebel as a former chief whip in the Lords this week. Why did you take the stance you did, along with other peers who defeated the government on suggesting that Parliament should take control of sifting those regulations rather than ministers?
Well, partly exactly why you just said it, actually. The Parliament should take control and not ministers. And what
Completely agree, Patrick, by the way.
And what the committee I chair, which is the delegated legislation committee, was saying was that at one stage there was going to be no parliamentary system whatsoever. I think the government made some very important changes to that bill. What we wanted to see were some further changes which brought into a sifting system. Now, we'll see how the government responds to the defeats in the Lords this week. Part of the job of the House of Lords is to ask the government sometimes to think again, to consider whether they've got it right. I think they did make some very important changes and welcome changes. I'm all for getting rid of unnecessary and regulations which aren't necessary either for us in safety measures or other areas. But I think there does need to be a parliamentary lock on it, and not just something which the executive says should or should not happen. The whole argument around Brexit, whichever, and I accept Brexit, I accept the result, and fully want to see the result implemented. But I don't think it should just be the executive that takes a decision. I think there should be a parliament.
Could I come in here then, Paul, please?
And that's what I would like to see happen, and that's why I voted the way I did this week.
Yes, sorry, I misheard what you said the first time. I actually do disagree with you. I misheard what you said. It must have been the line. I mean, look, we had a manifesto to take back control of our laws. And this is why we got our big majority. So I think it is down to the executive actually to make this decision. And otherwise, we will be in opposition, Patrick. And we've seen what it's like in the Lords. Left-wingism is far more prevalent there than it is across the country. And there'd keep being these blocks, and we'd go back to that Groundhog Day during the Theresa May's times. We need to get on with it, rip up all these laws like we said we was, and put in our own. Get the civil servants working their socks off to deliver, because when they really want to, they can deliver.
Andrea, when you fought the campaign, you said bring back control to Parliament, not to the executive. And it's all very well while it's an executive that you support, but in future, it might not be an executive you support, and then you might just want Parliament to have some control over it.
I understand that, Patrick, but look, during Theresa May's time when she was, working closely with Corbyn, and as I've said repeatedly, it was a Groundhog Day. We was an international embarrassment. We couldn't get the legislation through. We've honoured these promises, so we must deliver on them now, Patrick.
Of course we must deliver on them. I want to see them delivered, but I also want to see a parliamentary scrutiny and debatability, and that's what I'm asking the government to consider.
Can I ask you both a little bit about the issue of tax? The IFS told us this week that 1 in 5 of all taxpayers are now in the 40% bracket. How does the government actually address that issue ahead of the next election? Patrick first.
Well, I'd like to see taxes reduced, but at the moment, because of the money that the government's had to spend, I come back to these 2 points. Ukraine and COVID, they have been unlike anything any government has had to sort of deal with in the last 50 years. So there is a consequence of trying to get the public finances into order. Because without the public finances in order, you get lots of other problems. You get higher interest rates. That affects millions of people who are trying to get on the home owning ladder. So get the economy right, and other things fall from that. Once you've got the economy right, you can start reducing taxes, not just for those on higher incomes, but also for those at the bottom of the pile as well.
Andrea?
Right, thank you, Paul. I agree with you. We do need to lower taxes, but at the same time, I think raising taxes is counterproductive, because there's less money for people. People struggle more. There's less money for them to actually to spend in the economy, and so I think it's far better. I mean, I don't deny, the money we've spent during COVID. I mean, some of the schemes, Eat Out to Help Out, that Rishi, when he was Chancellor, I think was unnecessary personally, but that's just my view. But to me, the right way to do this is curb public spending. Osborne did a fantastic job with that, and I think we need to go back to those days to get the finances under control. We shouldn't be raising taxes, especially when people are struggling at the moment. I mean, constituents in my red wall seat of Morley and outward, people are struggling, and we shouldn't put more people into a higher tax bracket.
And just finally, Andrea, you, from everything you've said, it suggests that you think that Rishi Sunak's on borrowed time as Prime Minister. How long would you give it before the party actually wants to think again? Would you wait as late as next May, or do you think that it should be action sooner?
Look, I mean, to me, if Rishi starts delivering and he I want to see less of this flashy photo ops and more action, to be honest with you, because, you know, lots of money spent on these fantastic videos when people are struggling. It's not going down well in my constituency. So we've got to focus on delivery. And I'm not a psychic, Paul. I can't predict the future. We've seen all the turmoil over the last several years. But I'm being an outspoken Conservative because I just want us to return to a low tax, low spend Conservative government where we focus on the individual, where they can make their own choices in life. That's the kind of Conservative I am. And I think this is the kind of Conservative which will win us the next election.
And Patrick, do you think that Rishi is the only solution for the party over the next election?
I'm very much looking forward to Rishi being returned to Downing Street after the general election as our Prime Minister, and he'll lead us up to the general election as our leader.
Great. Thanks very much to both of you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sorry about the tech.
No problem.
All right.
Right.
Thank you.
Andrea.
All the best, Patrick. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.